In the heart of Victorian London, shadows hid more than secrets. They concealed a world of destitution and peril. Cramped quarters overflowed with the downtrodden, many seeking refuge in ramshackle tenements or fleeting repose in makeshift lodgings. Open sewers meandered through these deprived districts, a constant reminder of the unrelenting hardships and squalor. In this bleak landscape, poverty and illness thrive, taking their greatest toll on the young and the vulnerable. Welcome to Bizarre History, as today we delve deep into the 8 most horrific slums of Victorian London. St. Giles Rookery, located in the west end of Victorian London near Covent Garden, was notorious for being one of the worst slums in the city. Its history dates back to 1101 when Matilda, the wife of Henry I, established a leper hospital in the fields outside the city walls. This is how the area came to be known as St. Giles in the Fields. However, it was during the 18th century that St. Giles gained its reputation for being a hub of squalor and ruin. The famous artist William Hogarth captured the essence of life in St. Giles with his iconic work, Gin Lane. This painting depicted the harsh realities of living in this slum, portraying scenes of despair, neglect, and poverty. The streets were filled with the destitute individuals struggling to survive amidst crumbling buildings and unsanitary conditions. It was a place where hope seemed to have vanished, and the residents were trapped in a cycle of deprivation. As time passed, St. Giles Rookery only deteriorated further. The term rookery was commonly used to describe slums like this, and it perfectly encapsulated the state of this neighborhood. The overcrowding, disease, and rampant crime made St. Giles an unbearable place to live. The residents were trapped in a cycle of poverty and despair, with little hope for a better future. Westminster Abbey is a splendid sight to behold, a symbol of the glory and history of London. But not far from its majestic walls, there lies a hidden world of misery and crime, a world that few dare to enter or acknowledge. This is the world of the Devil's Acre, a notorious slum that was once the haunt of the lowest and most desperate of London's population. Charles Dickens, the famous novelist and social reformer, exposed the shocking reality of the Devil's Acre in his writings, challenging the popular image of Westminster as a city of palaces or magnificent squares and regal terraces. He wrote that there is no district in London more filthy and disgusting, more steeped in villainy and guilt, than that on which every morning sun casts the sober shadows of the Abbey. Dickens was not exaggerating. The Devil's Acre was a labyrinth of narrow alleys, crowded courts, and dilapidated houses where disease, poverty, and violence were rampant. It was here that Dickens witnessed the plight of the young outcasts who lived in the ragged dormitory and the Colonial Training School of Industry, a charitable institution that aimed to reform them and prepare them for a new life overseas. Some believe that Dickens drew inspiration from these scenes for his novels Oliver Twist and A Christmas Carol. The Devil's Acre was also a melting pot of different cultures and ethnicities, as many Irish immigrants settled there, creating their own rookery within the slum. The area was infested with pickpockets, thieves, prostitutes, and sharpers who preyed on each other and on the unsuspecting visitors. The Devil's Acre was a place where law and order had no power, where survival was the only rule. The slum of Wentworth Streets in London's Whitechapel district in 1872 was a place of abject poverty and suffering for many of the city's most destitute residents. Overcrowding plagued the area, with lodging houses packed to the brim with homeless men and women seeking shelter, though little was provided beyond a roof overhead. Most lodgings lacked even basic privies, and the horrid conditions drove many to walk the streets day and night instead. Crime and deprivation went hand in hand, as Charles Booth's poverty maps from the late 1800s revealed. Large sections of Whitechapel were colored black, indicating the lowest class and vicious semi-criminals, while other areas were shaded blue to denote degrees of poverty from very poor to simply poor. For those with neither home nor honest work, survival often meant turning to thievery, violence, or worse. And in the gloomy passageways and alleys of Whitechapel, an infamous killer stalked helpless victims under the cover of night. Jack the Ripper remains the world's most notorious murderer, though his true identity was never discovered. His gruesome crimes only added to the air of menace that permeated Whitechapel in those days. For many, simply living in such abject squalor was its own daily terror. Jack London was no stranger to poverty. Born in America in 1876, he had faced hardship and hunger since his childhood. As a journalist, he was drawn to the stories of the oppressed and the downtrodden. He wanted to expose the horrors of slum life in the 19th century, when many cities around the world, such as New York, were plagued by overcrowded and unsanitary housing. In 1902, he decided to embark on a daring adventure. He would live among the poor of London's East End, the most notorious and miserable area of the city. He would document his experiences in a book called The People of the Abyss. One of the most shocking episodes in his book is his visit to Frying Pan Alley, a street in Spitalfields where shoemakers worked in appalling conditions. He walked on the slippery pavement stained with dirt and grease and entered a house that was an abomination. He climbed a narrow and filthy staircase littered with garbage and waste and reached the rooms where the workers labored. He saw small spaces, barely enough for a large desk, and 20 people squeezed around it. They were surrounded by leather scraps, nails, glue, and other materials for making shoes. They worked long hours for meager wages, breathing in dust and fumes that made them sick. In one room, he saw a young boy lying on a bed dying of consumption. He looked out of the window and saw more misery. One-story hovels where families lived in squalor, roofs covered with rotted food and animal bones, and heaps of human refuse. Frying Pan Alley was a hell on earth. Nestled on the south bank of the River Thames stood the ominously named Jacob's Island. Though its grand title evoked images of an idyllic retreat, this notorious slum was anything but. Jacob's Island sat beside London's fetid river Neckinger, described as the very capital of cholera. As part of his famous journalistic exposé on London's destitute in the 1840s, Henry Mayhew was dispatched to document a cholera outbreak in the Bermondsey slums surrounding Jacob's Island. Mayhew captured first-hand interviews with residents of this bleak locale, later published in his seminal work London Labor and the London Poor. The living conditions he revealed were deplorable. Likewise, Charles Dickens etched Jacob's Island into literary infamy as the spot where vicious Bill Sikes meets his demise in Oliver Twist. The description of squalor and violence were so visceral that Dickens felt compelled to apologize to readers for creating such a hellish landscape. And a hellscape it was, choked with pollution and disease. Even the Luftwaffe's extensive bombing of London in World War II seemed to some as divine providence, demolishing these decrepit hovels once and for all. Though the old slums were razed long ago, faint outlines still haunt the modern streets, echoes of poverty and human suffering whispering from the past. Bethnal Green was not a place for the faint-hearted in the Victorian era. It was the epitome of poverty and misery, a notorious rookery that attracted the attention of social reformers and journalists. One of them was George Sims, who wrote about the appalling conditions of the poor in his book, How the Poor Live and Horrible London. He described Bethnal Green as a human dust heap, where people lived in overcrowded and dilapidated tenements, with no sanitation, ventilation, or comfort. One of the worst streets in Bethnal Green was Old Nickel Street, where the walls were so damp they seemed to sweat. The inhabitants were mostly casual laborers, hawkers, thieves, and prostitutes who struggled to survive on meager earnings or charity. In 1889, a survey by Charles Booth revealed that 45% of the Bethnal Green population lived below the basic subsistence level, the highest rate in London. In the Victorian era, London's desirable Notting Hill of today was a far cry from its polished image now. Once riddled with slums and disease, Notting Hill was denounced by Charles Dickens as a plague spot scarcely equaled for its insalubrity. The area dubbed the Potteries and Piggeries was especially noxious. Originally called Cutthroat Lane, it declined into squalor when pig keepers and unruly brickmakers moved in alongside the destitute residents. In their ramshackle hovels, people slept alongside mud-caked pigs and other animals, lacking even basic sanitation. The environments were so putrid that the locale earned its repugnant nickname. It was here that the notorious slum landlord Peter Rockman operated, exploiting vulnerable tenants with the most derelict housing. Rockmanism became synonymous with landlords profiteering off unsafe slum conditions. On today's streets, the last remaining brick-making kiln on Walmer Road north of Pottery Lane offers a glimpse into the district's unsavory past. Though the foul shanties and sites are long gone, the ghosts of Notting Hill's infamous slums still haunt the smart brick facades and the tidy gardens that now occupy their place. Southwark, a district on the south bank of the Thames, has a long and troubled history. In the 19th century, it was a place of misery and vice, where the poorest and most desperate people of London lived and died. It was also a place that haunted and inspired one of the greatest writers of all time, Charles Dickens. Southwark got its name from South Wark, or work, meaning the southern fortification of the city. But it was far from a fortress. It was a slum where the lowest class of society struggled to survive. There were the chimney sweeps and the prostitutes, the doomed prisoners and the cunning thieves, the street vendors and the body snatchers, and there were the workhouses where the destitute were forced to labor in appalling conditions. One of these workhouses was St. Saviour's Union Workhouse on Mint Street, which is said to have influenced Dickens' novels. The Lancet, a medical journal, described the woman's ward of the workhouse as a miserable room, foul and dirty, the floor being simply bedded with straw and a den of horrors. Dickens himself visited the workhouse and witnessed its horrors firsthand. If you want more of history's long-held secrets and darkest confessions, hit like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. From us at Bizarre History, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.